think the main thing is that people don't quite understand what it is that easily. People think it's some way of mixing AI into your API in some way. Like your API is going to change what it does, and magically it's going to sort of do new things, which of course isn't what it is. It's AI using APIs. There's a lot of questions you get that I can't answer that well because they're about other ways to actually like inject prompts back into the LLM or other things. But I think part of it is just that if you're using an MCP to use your API, it's good to not expose too much of it, and it's good to also have your API be very secure in the first place.
Hi, I'm Alex Saltkeeper, and I'm here at MCP DevSummit North America, New York City. I'm here with Ben Morss of DeepL,
Hi.
which is tell us what it is, please.
What is DeepL? DeepL is a AI language translation company based in Germany. We've got about 1,000 employees, so it's like a popular like phone app and web app and such thing in countries like Germany and other European countries, and also Japan and even Korea. Not as well known in North America, so they hire people like me to be here in North America and say, "Hey, we exist. Hello, hi,
Good
here we
plug. Love
are."
it. Love it. Love it.
Thank
So
you.
the reason I wanted to talk to you, though, is your
Yes.
recent MCP Roadshow. 10 countries in 10 days, I believe it was.
It wasn't quite 10 countries, but
Okay,
there
well,
were, or
yeah.
10 days, but there
How did
were.
this come about? This mad plan to spread MCP to the world.
Yeah, it just kind of grew organically. So when I got to DeepL and became the developer advocate person, I had this remit to make it so people knew what DeepL was in North America. And so developers knew we existed. So I had to get out there in communities and just find people. And so I was looking for ways to do that. I thought, oh, here's a hackathon in San Francisco. Like this was like May
Oh, so it's
2nd,
just
May
10 cities
3rd.
and sorry, not
10
countries.
cities, yeah. It was 10 planets and 10 light years. No, it was 10 cities, I think.
Very
10
cool.
cities, 10 talks in 4 countries, I think. Yeah, where did I go? Into the US, of course, Canada,
Yeah.
France, Germany, I think those are the countries. There's demand in more places too, certainly for this. So, anyway, so I thought, okay, we'll be bold. We'll go to San Francisco and sponsor a hackathon there. And I was, I was following AI, following agentic AI, listening to lots of podcasts and trying things out. But I didn't know what MCP was at all. I just kept hearing about it. I thought, what are we going to do to go to San Francisco? All these cool like AI hipsters, with all their cool AI companies
It's like,
based in
oh,
the
it's
Bay
Tuesday.
Area.
There's 75 hackathons. So yes.
Exactly. Yeah, and like I noticed deep bell at all. What are we gonna do? But I'm pretty brave sometimes, so I figured we would just go there. And then I heard about MCP, and I thought we should build an MCP server. This is like the latest hotness.
Just
People are
on the
using this
fly,
stuff.
like YOLO MCP stuff.
That was the idea. And then there was an engineer who knew about it too and wanted to try it out. And his manager thought it was a good idea, so we just built an MCP server. Mostly him. His name was Akash, and he did most of the work. And we just kind of helped him like debug a little bit. And
So you
then
did
it
this in
seemed to
like
work.
essentially like a week or something, right? I
It
mean,
was pretty quick, yeah,
okay, cool.
which you can do with MCP as we've learned. It isn't that hard to actually use if you know
Right.
how to use it, which we didn't, of course. So there were some confusing things that happened, some confusing bugs, but basically we finished it. I went down to this hackathon, gave my talk at the beginning, like, "Hey, you got an MCP server?" And everyone just figured one of the many AI companies that existed. People accepted us as one of their own, and it was actually pretty successful. People didn't use it much in the hackathon, honestly. They kind of used the API instead. But having it meant that we were like a sort of a player in the scene. It was kind of like wearing the right shirt or the right glasses. We showed we knew what was going on with MCP. That's how it all began, just kind of as a spontaneous idea to fit into a hackathon.
And so how did it progress? Because it sounded like you learned a lot from
Yeah.
giving essentially 10 MCP hackathons in 4 countries over a very short span of time. I mean, I'm kind
Yeah.
of curious, A, what you learned, B, what you saw that was different in the audiences, or even the tenor of how people were approaching MCP, how it was different. Like what did you learn?
I just thought it was a really good topic, and I just got really interested in the topic myself. I mean, tech these days is really fascinating. It's changing all the time, and AI is so interesting. I got really deep into actually how it worked. I thought, how could this possibly happen? Like, this is an LLM. It just like says stuff. It talks to us. We know really what it is. It takes in tokens as input, puts out tokens as output. How does it like use tools? And none of the explanations I saw talked about how it actually worked. They're all kind of similar and talked about the USB-C for AI and didn't talk
Right,
about
right,
what
right.
actually happened. So I did a lot of thinking about it, investigating, asking friends who are more deeply involved in AI than I was, and so I really understood it well. And then I thought, well, I have to give a talk in June in New York. I'll give a workshop at MCP because I think it should be a thing everyone understands how to do. So this would be a good reason for me to figure out, like in a couple weeks, how it really works well enough to actually teach people how to use it, which is a big challenge to actually teach a thing you don't really know at all. But again, try to go for challenges in life, and this makes us learn things. So I realized it wasn't that hard to actually make a server. Like you could actually make a server in 7 lines of Python. You could explain it actually pretty easily. I found like the inspirations for it, like the tool former paper from a couple of years ago that talked about how to actually just train the model with data that wasn't just data, but also these faux function calls that then could be spat out by the model later on as actual function calls, intercepted, and then used as actual function calls. So I gave this workshop and it was surprisingly successful. Like the room was packed. People had a lot of questions. They actually listened. I think for the most part, they didn't ignore me as much as they might normally ignore me. Afterwards, people were like, the next day, I built an MCP server. I did it. Here it is. So I
And you're kind of
realized there
like,
was
"This is
demand.
great." Then you're like, "Oh." Yeah,
Yeah, people really were interested in the topic, and it's a nice entry point to learning about how to use AI
yeah.
because I realized you could build a server pretty quickly. I made a sample server that was just basically it told jokes. So the simplest tool just returned the same joke every time. So very easy to understand, just return the same string every time. And the jokes API I found is very easy to use. No API key was necessary. You can just call the API as a REST API. So I made more tools to get various kinds of jokes. And I thought it was pretty easy to understand how it worked. It didn't look like complicated code or anything. Once you install a fast MCP or your favorite client library, you could just kind of do it. So I made some sample servers like this, and I started using these in more and more workshops because people always wanted to hear about MCP. It was a good topic for talks.
Obviously. So,
Yeah.
like, over the next 7, 8, I mean, like, what changed? What progressed? Was there, like,
Yeah.
it's sort of, things that at the end that were very different, or
I did a bunch of Google Dev Fest actually because I used to work at Google. I had friends there, and so they had me come in October. Actually, my indie rock band played opening the show. And then I gave an MCP talk after that, which is kind of a funny combination, possibly. What changed? There were mostly it was just, there were cases that people were more interested or less interested. People needed to know about it more in some cases, less in some cases. But I think the demand is still as high as it was before. I did my last workshop on pure MCP in February in Philadelphia, and it was for an audience of AI specialists who really understood how to train models more than I do, and they were still interested in the talk and didn't know these things about how it worked. And I mean, I think the main thing is that people don't quite understand what it is that easily. People think it's some way of mixing AI into your API in some way, like your API is going to change what it does, and magically it's going to sort of do new things, which of course isn't what it is. It's AI using APIs. So I think they like the idea that you can actually get the AI to act in a rational way, like use one of these tools over here, but use the API in other kinds of ways. It's restricted, it's discrete, it's not as stochastic. But to your question, what actually has changed since then? Not much actually has changed, to be honest.
that's cool. So, essentially, like, the protocol, people are starting to get it, and the questions are better,
The
and
desire to learn is still as big as it was before. The questions are kind of the same questions. Like,
so what are, like, the top 5 questions that people get, or the misconceptions, or I mean, if you
yeah.
were gonna redesign the course from the ground up, what would you do differently?
I would like show how it worked by actually showing an example. Actually, it's not that hard to do. You actually can go to Claude or your LM and just tell it, okay, now you can use tools with this protocol over here and put in some fake XML or JSON, and it will say, okay, I'll do that. And it'll begin spitting out things using those tools. You could then say, what's 5 times 8? Use your new math tool. It uses this math tool it already knows about. And instead of putting out 40, it says, angle brackets math 5 times 8, close angle brackets math. So now the LMs are good at actually using tools and smart about it. I think I try to just talk about how it actually works. It actually generates a prompt, and the prompt is a thing which gets in the system prompt, and this explains how the tools work. This is why your context windows can get eaten up because you have a lot of stuff in there. I would explain how it worked and what it is. People wouldn't be as surprised by what it actually is. So I still get questions about that, like how it actually works, and questions that reflect what really is going on. But more common questions I get are about security.
I was gonna say. So what do you tell them?
I tell them, "Be careful," because it's kinda like shareware. I mean, if you're downloading someone else's code to your laptop and letting it run, then be careful about that kind of
Sure, but on the
thing.
design side,
Yeah.
what are the because I mean, the project has a long security best practices doc. What do you
Mm.
tend to start with in helping people?
There's a lot of questions you get that I can't answer that well because they're about, are there ways to actually, like, inject prompts back into the LLM or, other things? But I think part of it is just that if you're, using an MCP to use your API, it's good to not expose too much of it, and it's good to also have your API be very secure in the first place. And then it comes down to API security. You can use the same kinds of things, I think, to secure your API and secure your API against LLMs using your API. And then, yeah, look for those best practices and authorization. Make sure that people can't just like easily spin up gigantic queries that will, slow down your servers and things like that. Honestly, I don't have the best advice for security. I think it's still a thing people have to deal with themselves and look into themselves. My best advice is still just make sure your stuff is secure, be careful about it, and make sure you do the usual things, sanitizing input, all those kinds of things you usually would do. Look out for authorization problems, those kinds of things.
And so as you kind of traveled from one
Yeah.
of these to the next, did you see differences in the way people thought about it? Like the AI experts versus the noobs, or people that are sort of full stack guys, or
Hmm.
what were the differences in the questions you got from the different audiences?
I couldn't always tell, honestly. That's a good question. I should be able to tell, but it's just different places at different kinds of questions and different kinds of levels of interest. I gave one talk actually it was actually at a business school
Oh,
in
really?
Canada. It was another Google Dev Fest, but the students weren't that interested. The professionals were more interested. This talk I gave, I think, at all was API Days in Paris. The room was really full. People were outside the room, and they're really just curious about what this thing was and how they could use it themselves. I think we overestimate how people actually might know things because people that are really involved in a technology really think everyone knows what they're doing. But everyone else out there is just kind of like, oh, I saw this thing, I saw an article about this thing somewhere, but what is this thing? I don't quite know what it is. Unless you actually use it, you don't really get what it is.
So if you were going to try to summarize, like, you know,
Yeah.
the quick start guide in, I don't know, 5 minutes or whatever, what are the sort of the principles you'd go over?
I would just show how to build a really simple MCP server. And yeah, I talk about the principles first of like basically what it is. It's a way you can get an LLM to actually make these faux function calls, and you then control the function calls yourself. It calls your server. Your server is working over here. It's just basically functions. It can call your API or not, but that's all it is. It's basically you write functions that then the MCP server can go ahead and call if it wants to. And then, show how to build some simple ones, simple things. Once you get the simple ideas down, the rest can follow from there. What I found harder, though, MCP apps and other kinds of new things, they don't always work for me quite yet, and they're harder to explain. Like, the protocol for MCP apps is more complicated, MCP UI, this sort of thing.
Yeah.
I have not found a simple way to actually explain how that works or to even show how that works.
So were you involved with the design and construction at DeepL of the MCP server? I mean, did you kind of watch the process?
Yeah, I kinda make that of myself now.
So 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 what were the conventions around that? Because I mean, it's
Mm.
kind of interesting. I mean, the idea of a language server over MCP.
Yeah.
Like sort of why or what's different, or I mean, and how do you design it? So that's different than a straight up API or something like that.
Yeah, it's not that different. I mean, it's mostly about trying to find the most commonly used functions of the API and make them really easy to use. Like send translation texts, sending text, getting text back, and just trying to make sure you can look for errors, like are language codes used correctly? Did you require a country code over here or not? And give helpful information to the LM so it knows what to actually do. And when I first did this, I remember it would fail because it would use language codes incorrectly. It would use lowercase instead of uppercase sometimes and things like that. So
So it's not that forgiving yet.
but now it's much more forgiving because 1, we made it more forgiving by giving more information in the annotations,
Yeah.
type annotations, and so on. And 2, LLMs have gotten smarter at what they try.
So when you started, what were you working on? I mean, what was the LLM in the back? What you were piping into?
I usually use Claude because Claude Desktop was the most fun thing to demo in, and I
Okay.
tended to make conversation with you, and it would try things out and try to be helpful. But it's gotten much better at this stuff. Like last talk I gave in this, I did a talk at DrupalCon last week, and I wrote an MCP server that would look for translations existing in your Drupal site. And if there weren't any, it would suggest making new ones for you and send those over for you. And it began doing all this stuff by itself. I gave it a couple of tools, and it would use DeepL's MCP server, which already is in my Claude desktop, and use my one I made for Drupal. And it was just all kinds of things. Do you want me to translate this into Danish for you? And here it is. And it also would comment on translations because it also knows translations itself, being also Claude behind the scenes. So you can comment on the translations in other kinds
Yeah.
of ways.
Did you I mean, so essentially you had it almost like co-browsing and like, "Hey, look at this Drupal site," and,
Yeah.
and let's do pour over the CMS and look at, sort of all the meta text or whatever, and tell me what you think it I mean, and then it went on its own. It's like, "Oh, by the way."
Yeah, I give access to look at the nodes and see what was in the nodes, the article nodes, other kinds of nodes, and we just look at these things and start making suggestions, which I didn't expect at all. I thought it required a lot more human intervention, but it really tries to be helpful.
And that's like something that in the past, weren't there specialized tools that you would use for translation versus, sort of generic, LLMs.
Mhm. That was the idea exactly, because people use these things called cat tools, where they're these large things with often very old-looking interfaces that are kinda like a scary-looking version of Excel, where they send off stuff for machine translation as a first draft, then the translator will then modify them as they want to, and it can go and find whether text you've translated before is present in new text, and it can try to suggest more things for you. So I thought if you're actually a translator working for a Drupal site, you're not gonna wanna go and probably walk in and, like, start typing things into Drupal because it can be a little confusing. Maybe you're gonna wanna use your favorite LLM and just talk to it, use Claude
Yeah.
or ChatGPT or something. And it was surprisingly effective at that. Like, it was really pretty friendly.
So you almost discovered a new product category for DeepL without realizing what you're doing.
Yeah, maybe we'll actually make this into a product people could use. I mean, I think in these MCP apps, you could actually what it can't do now, that what server I made, like, in a couple of days, is you can't really modify things yourself that easily. You can, but
So it's mostly
it's not
read only
friendly.
and
It's like, it'll say, "Okay, here's the translation for you. Do you wanna use this or not?" You can type in a new translation, or you can copy and paste it and change things. Should be more like an interface, more like a CAD tool where you have little boxes, and then, "Here's the translations. Do you like these things or not? Feel free to modify these things." Send them all off as a batch to the Drupal site. That'd be a better way to do it.
and from my understanding to or the audience's understanding, um, how is DeepL's translation layer differentiated or better than what
Mhm.
you might get out of the frontier LLMs right now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because DeepL first came out in 2017. They had the best translation anywhere because they had their own models. They trained to do these things with linguist help, and it was better than Google Translate, better than anything else. LLMs came out with a pretty good translation just kind of out of the box.
Yeah.
So DeepL has now trying to stay ahead by just taking models, building its own models, fine-tuning models, and just doing more and more testing with linguists, more and more fine-tuning. And studies and tests do show that DeepL is better for most language pairs in most cases, often substantially better, but it's more of a race now because LLMs can do pretty good translation.
Yeah.
If you want very good translation, you should use like a company like DeepL that does it, only this kind of stuff. People often say they prefer it, and people will use this because it's just better. You're translating stuff kind of casually for fun, or just a few strings on your site. You could probably use an ALM out there and do it that way.
So if anybody wants to use the DeepL MCP server,
Yes.
they can basically integrate it into like as a front layer in front of anything that they're doing.
Yeah, just
Um,
stick it in there, try it out, and your LLM will know to use DeepL usually instead of its own translation these days, because it will know there's a tool for that. They're kind of biased towards using tools as opposed to not using tools,
yeah.
and it just gives you a higher quality of translation. If you have things where your translation quality really matters to you, it's pretty cheap actually to DeepL.
So were people actually building things, MCP apps or whatever with the DeepL MCP during this tour? I mean, did you start to see people try to do translation stuff?
I can't tell if they're coordinated or not. We've seen growth quite a bit in our DeepL MCP server usage.
Yeah.
It's growing very, it's still very small compared to the actual API, which is very large, of course, but it's growing very fast. I hear from folks sometimes who are building things with it and they're making various things with it. I think they just find it more convenient than using the API sometimes because our tools are more carefully defined, like here's a translation text, here's translating a document, and there are more guardrails around these things. So I think it's just easier to use.
So like essentially the flexibility of MCP was something that as you were traveling around, it's just much easier for people that don't want to have to think in terms of the structures of an API or REST
And in some
API
ways,
or
it's the
anything.
reverse because an API may be a whole new thing. Like, what is this API? How do I use this thing? MCP, I think it's just sort of simpler. Here's the tool. You give this tool these 2 or 3 parameters, and then it gives you the results you're looking for.
Very cool. So when's the next tour?
That's a good question. The last talk was just last week, but actually trying to focus on making some scaled content, like writing more of the traditional DevRel, things like more documentation, make some videos, things like that. So I'm taking a little break from travel now to do those things. And I want to go back out there and talk again, maybe more about agentic AI and more of those sorts of topics that are also, of
Yeah.
course, hot topics, building agents, which is super hot, as you know. But MCP, I mean, people still don't know what it is in most cases.
Outside of New York, San Francisco.
Or people that are just following these things and who are working with it and have tried it
Yeah.
themselves, those people are still like, "What is this thing?" So I think the
Outside the AI
demand
bubble.
we always forget the demand is still there for just, introductory content. It's always there for everything.
So the next time you do a tour, what are you gonna do differently when you design your MCP curriculum?
I'm gonna try to make an MCP app this time and see if I can go all the way to making apps and using the new fancier features and seeing how that goes. It's a good question. I feel like what I had did before, how can I improve it? I feel like actually if I could get people to do more coding themselves, that'd be nice because then they learn things for real. I'd have workshops, people often would come in without a computer and wanted to just listen to a talk.
Right. So they didn't do hands-on as much.
Actually, when I first did it, I thought I'd do a workshop. And people just came and they were looking at me like, okay, talk to us. So I made it into a talk spontaneously, and they did it later in some cases.
Yeah.
Can actually try it themselves. I think it's probably better. So I think if I was going to do it again, if I do it again, I'll try to get folks to actually really write some code and know that you can use Python, you can use TypeScript, you can use your favorite language. You can do it pretty quickly. As long as you've got something installed on your computer, which is an LLM, which is an AI haven't got yet. If they have an AI client, they can do it. You can install your library. You can just go and do it. And it feels like magic, actually, when LLMs are actually like using your tool and you see it doing that and then responding with your information you've given it is really kind of cool.
I mean, I personally, I'm not a coder. I'm a dangerous coder, right? Like I could code stuff. You would not.
Everyone's a coder
You
now.
would not want
so.
me to put it in prod, but yeah, it's just blown me away how you can essentially go into Claude Code, give it a spec.
Yeah.
It'll recommend the tool, or if there's MCP servers out there that make sense, it'll recommend them. It's really really different.
Yeah, watching like again, like Claude or ChatGPT or something, actually use your tools and like call 2 or 3 of your tools. Like I could do a thing. It's when I give a demo, which is like, okay, and I'm going to have it use a translation tool. Now I'm going to ask it to translate this thing, but like find a joke and then translate the joke. We'll call 2 tools. People are on the edge of their seats. Now we're going to have it actually like tell a joke, translate it into French, and put it into a spreadsheet. 3 tools, and you watch as Claude spins, and then actually usually it does it right. So it's exciting. It's oddly suspenseful and gratifying because
Super
it
awesome.
usually works.
Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you also.
Tell the audience one last time, like who you are and what you do again, in case they're catching the tail end.
In case you forgot or missed the beginning because for whatever reason you're doing something else, I am Ben Morss. I'm from DeepL, a developer advocate, and we're talking about MCP servers, how they work. And DeepL is a language translation company that uses AI, makes its own models to make language translation as good as possible.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Enjoy MCP DevSummit.
I will. Thanks.